Hey guys, it is January 20th, 2026 here with your after hours recap. So, where do we begin? We had Bitcoin, pretty nasty down day today. I kind of woke up and I saw that SLLT at one point was down 20. Today it closed down 24%, which is, kind of massive. You had Ethereum down, I want to say 8% today. Actually about 7%. You had Bitcoin down 3.5%. And you also had your QQQ gap down and follow through lower. You had the S&P 500 gap down and follow through lower. So you're starting to get some unwind because of this tech and software sentiment, whether it be your cybersecurity names, just your regular software application names. Your Apple at one point today was down 4.5%. That, of course, is not going to help. You get Amazon, which looks like, hey, maybe Amazon's off to the races. And then you round trip the move. And I personally thought this thing was viable right through 233. And it's just kind of a good microcosm of what my year so far has looked like. And it's been just a lot of round tripping of gains. Again, just look at a Reddit. You think a Reddit is good in here, and then all of a sudden, you kind of round trip it. And that's just been, Baba, same story for me. It looks pretty good for a few days, and then all of a sudden, we're basically trying to round trip the move. And yeah, that's just been kind of my year. If you looked across the board, I don't think any of the sectors that I'm watching individually, outside of maybe silver, had an amazing day. And yes, silver had a pretty good day. Hecla had a pretty good day. I did get stopped out of my SILJ. I took some off on Friday. I got stopped out of the rest today. In hindsight, I probably just go ahead and get out of the entire thing on Friday. I was playing it as an idea that silver is starting to get a little bit too extended from the 50 simple moving average, and eventually we would be, kind of having a retrace. But silver staying incredibly strong, gold staying incredibly strong, and on the flip side of that, I am happy that I do continue to hold some Newmont, which is acting well. And then really, I didn't do a good enough job getting short software. I am short Netflix, and we are down on earnings. We are down about 82, 83 bucks, 82.90 at the moment. So we are all the way back down to April's lows. So kicking off earnings on the software side of things, not the best. They did come out and say that they will not be paying the dividend anymore until they get this whole Warner Brothers deal kind of done and over with. So no more dividend, and you get a bit of a gap down. So I did go ahead and cover another little piece right around 83 bucks. Can feel pretty good about that, but basically everywhere you looked, whether it was CEG or whether it was the Bitcoin miners, even Cypher, which I owned on Friday, you get a pretty big gap down overnight. And I did try to, I did add to my position effectively as a 5-minute opening range break. And then as you started to roll over, I did get out of my Cypher with just a couple of cents of profit, and I kept my original adds from Friday. So I could feel at least pretty good about that, because names have just been round tripping on me, taking a little bit off the table. Better than nothing, but effectively we have been just spinning the wheels for the last few weeks. Unless you own some of these memory stocks, whether it be SNDK, or a few of the aerospace and defense stocks, and beautiful, beautiful move. Still just surfing the 5-day and starting to get a little bit extended, 11.5 times its ATR from the 50. So, one to kind of make sure that you've at least paid yourself on. But the reality is that, I'm not gaining a whole lot of traction. So I am trying to just be a little bit conscious of, not digging myself into too much of a hole, but ultimately, it's just hard for me to get really much of anything going. You did have some nice continuation, whether it was in copper, SCCO, or HBM continues to act really, really awesome. I like this thing kind of as a little flat base breakout throughout here. I didn't buy it, but ultimately a nice move. Copper's continuing to act, pretty clean. Palladium looks pretty good. Platinum still looks pretty good. They've consolidated well. Are they going to kind of join the party again? And then gold, obviously, it feels like 5,000 is a magnet for gold. It feels like $100 might be a magnet for silver. we'll just kind of wait and see to see if that happens. And it even looks like 500 is a magnet for SanDisk. So just some incredible action going on with individual names, but again, everywhere else that you might have looked within the semi sector, maybe not so good today for an NVIDIA living below the 50. Not so good today for an AVGO, starting to potentially break down. Hasn't looked so good for Hood for the handful of weeks. Does not look so good for a Palantir at the moment. So what do we make of this environment? I really don't know. If you look at the XME, which is your metals and mining, continues to be your best group at the moment. Your XLI is another one. Obviously, a little bit of a down day today, partially because of Caterpillar, but ultimately, metals and mining continue to be your leading group. And let me just check the ETFs. It looks like all ETFs, with the exception of some staples and with the exception of some healthcare, everything else was red. And your XLP, might be one of the only reasons that XLP was green today was because of this Monster beverage. That's a pretty monster breakout for Monster beverage. But otherwise, it's hard sledding out here. I don't know. Maybe I'm just the only one, or maybe you guys are also kind of feeling the brunt of round trips, and there's not a whole lot that you can do about that other than just size your positions down, continue to use progressive exposure. Everybody can make money in a really easy environment. This isn't one of them, especially not when the markets are kind of doing what they did today. They need to get back above the 50 simple moving average. And again, it might look kind of innocent where you're like, oh, it's no big deal that you lose the 50. But look, Apple lost the 50 a handful of weeks ago, and all of a sudden it may not look, like a big deal when you lose the 50. You're going to sit there and draw, your technical lows and just say, oh, it's got support here and it's got support there. The reality is, for me, it's very simple. If it's below the 50 simple moving average, I try to not argue with that too much. And ultimately, you finally get a big washout for an Apple today. Again, NVIDIA, not the best. And I got to give some credit to an AMD. I think that this one is acting fairly well, considering you are above the 50 simple moving average. But even at TSM today, after earnings, this thing has effectively gone nowhere. I don't necessarily think that that's an issue, but it just kind of goes to show you the environment that we are in. You start to drop, 4.5% for a TSM. That is not the best look. You're living below the 200 on Meta. You're living below the 200 on Microsoft. Cybersecurity stocks look pretty damn weak, as can be seen by Zscaler over the last 2 months. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of the tape at the moment, other than it is very difficult. And you have to kind of continue to use progressive exposure. I'm trying my best to leave my NEM on while gold continues to work. And then, kind of on the, play me the world's smallest violin. I did, did take a kind of shitty loss in SILJ, and that is my own fault, just a little bit oversizing, thinking maybe the move on silver had gotten a little bit extended and going a bit for, as they'd say, the jugular, only to kind of get the head ripped off. But we'll talk about that one a little bit later. But yeah, just a tougher environment. XLC is another ETF that looks like we might be starting to break down as well. So you just kind of, everywhere you look, it's just a bit of weakness. XLU is another one that you're just like, okay, we're trying to hold, but we're still not getting above the 50 simple moving average. If it's not GEV, all the other utilities, kind of look pretty poor. So again, I wish I had better answers for what to do in this environment. I am trying my best to locate some relative strength, stay in stocks that are showing relative strength, but ultimately stocks that are showing relative strength just get beaten up a few days later if you're not peeling some off into strength. That's probably one of the things that I've done most poor so far this year, is I haven't taken shares off into strength maybe as best as I could have, and that is kind of costing me at the moment. And then obviously, you push, pedal to the metal at the wrong time on a group that's still going completely vertical. Although, I look at silver and I think about the extension from the 50-day, are we due for a pullback soon? you would think, but it's not happening yet, and I can't remain stubborn while that kind of starts to develop. So yeah, I wish I had some better answer for what was going on out here. Hopefully you guys are all trading well and staying out of harm's way. I'm just kind of keeping it real and letting you know what's going on from my side. Like I said, I'm trying to get positioned on the long side. I try to get BABA. Today I try to buy LEU, with the uranium stocks, and I'm like, okay, this is finally going to start to go. Nope, you get stuffed right away. So LEU did not work for me. And I tried to add decisive, and I took that one off for a small little gain. So all things told, not that bad. ALAB continues to act pretty well, but is this thing actually going to go on to work if an AMD or a CRDO roll over? I don't know. 185 is definitely going to be the spot that I'm watching. But by the time we got up to 185 today, with the gap down, we had moved more than our average daily range, so I did leave it alone. So a little bit frustrated. I'm trying to not be too frustrated because it's just, not that big a deal. It's just a couple of days, couple of weeks. I do wish I were trading better in some of these names, right? On the 2nd of January, right, instead of buying SNDK, I end up buying Reddit. I end up buying ALAB. Get shaken out on ALAB right away. Get shaken out on Reddit a few days later. So, just not the right names. It's just like maybe right thesis, even AppLovin. I try to short this thing well. Right in here as you're taking out a prior day low, I end up getting stopped out. All it ends up doing is running into the declining 20 before ultimately, fading 70 points basically from where I had initially shorted it. And that's just kind of my luck at the moment. And you kind of just got to keep showing up every day, executing your process, and then the cards will fall where they will, but show up every day and continue to execute. Where's money going? Where's money leaving? Don't buy things that are too extended, even though in this environment, if you're looking at silvers or SanDisk, it seems to be working. So anyway, hopefully you guys are staying out of harm's way, and I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Cheers.